In October 2019, the large body of the Syrian Constitutional Committee met for the first and only time in Geneva. This was followed by the first meeting of the small body in November. Around the same time, the European Centre for Kurdish Studies began implementing its project, One Constitution for All Syrians, facilitating the peace process in Syria, which was succeeded from May 2022 by the One Constitution for All Syrians, supporting power sharing and strengthening minority rights project. These projects were funded by the SPI, Syria Peace Initiative, which started out as a program by the German Federal Foreign Office and the European Union, and is being implemented by the GIZ, German Agency for International Cooperation. The aim of both projects was to support the Syrian opposition, and especially the members of the Syrian Constitutional Committee, in drafting a democratic constitution. To this end, we organized a number of capacity-building workshops.
At the end of 2020, which was the 100th anniversary of the Syrian Constitution, we explored the history of the Syrian Constitution, searching for examples of decentralized, or perhaps even federal, constitutional elements. As a matter of fact, such elements are contained in the Constitution of 1920. Then, in 2021, we examined what Syria might learn from the developments in Tunisia. After spending the previous years taking European countries as models, we decided to turn to an Arab country. Another issue was fiscal federalism. As we all know, a decentralized system depends on decentralized units having their own budget, which is independent of the central government. But how can this kind of autonomy be implemented?
Another workshop investigated the question of what corruption actually is and how to fight it effectively. The issue goes far beyond constitutional questions, but is nevertheless of great importance, not just because the corrupt structures of Assad's regime were one trigger for the Syrian revolution, but also because members of the Syrian opposition and civil society have been repeatedly accused of corruption, lack of transparency, and soliciting or accepting undue benefits. The participants of our workshop, which we held in cooperation with the Protestant Academy Locum, were given the opportunity to explore this topic through an experimental game.
وأنا هون فدوى إبراهيم رئيسة حزب الأخضر الشعب كله عم يطلع علي لحتى أقدر حارب الفساد.
In addition to organizing capacity-building workshops, the European Centre for Kurdish Studies established the so-called Minority Advisor Board, an advisory body composed of minority representatives. Their task is to provide guidance to the small body of the Syrian Constitutional Committee during meetings in Geneva to work on the principles of a Syrian constitution.
Why establish a minority advisor board? It's simple. The composition of the Constitutional Committee does not reflect the composition of Syrian society at large. Ethnic minorities are underrepresented, and since all decisions are taken by majority vote, their legitimate demands have little chance of being met. We can't influence the composition of the Constitutional Committee, but what we, or rather the Minority Advisor Board, can do is to offer advice to minority representatives, to write background papers for them, to formulate constitutional principles, and to assist them in all constitutional questions.
The Minority Advisor Board also organized a meeting with international diplomats to inform them about minority positions, especially those of the Kurdish and Assyrian people, and to shed light on the human rights situation in the Kurdish parts of Syria. This work was complemented by the Erbil meetings, which brought together representatives of the Kurdish National Council and the Assyrian Democratic Movement, with representatives of individual groups within the Syrian Negotiations Commission, SNC, including the Cairo Platform and the National Coordination Committee for Democratic Change. The purpose of these meetings was to work together to form common positions on a new Syrian constitution. What should the official languages of Syria be? How can gender equality be achieved? What form of decentralization do we want? These were just some of the many hotly debated questions. Ultimately, the Syrian Constitutional Committee was the only attempt to implement the measures outlined in the UN Resolution 2254. The so-called political process consisted of a mere 8 Constitutional Committee meetings between 2019 and May-June 2022. While various constitutional principles were discussed during the last 3 meetings, an agreement between the government delegation, the opposition, and civil society could not be reached. Instead, the step-by-step, step-for-step approach promoted by the UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir O. Peterson, among others, to help find a political solution for Syria, initiated a process of normalization of relations with Syria. The process included Syria's unconditional readmission to the Arab League in May 2023. The question of why the Syrian constitution-making process is not producing results was debated during a workshop at the European Centre for Kurdish Studies in Vevey in January 2022, where discussions mainly focused on the UN's weakness. One proposition in the conclusion paper was, give a stronger role to the UN and allow the Special Envoy and its team or other mandated actors to set the framework, impact on the agenda, propose principles and norms for debate, and more generally have a stronger hand in the process. At least the UN could provide clarity in regard to the binding international legal framework, in particular in the field of human and minority rights and freedoms. Next to the members of the Syrian Constitutional Committee, our project centered around a group which ironically is often neglected when it comes to discussing a new Syrian constitution: the Syrian population. Even the best possible constitution depends on the support of the majority in order to have a positive effect. This is why the constitution-making process needs to be as inclusive as possible. And the very first step towards inclusiveness is publicity. Syrians can only be expected to support the Constitutional Committee if they know what the committee is discussing, which positions each group represents, and why. In order to create publicity and transparency, we produced a short video after each event, summarizing the key outcomes. We posted the videos on Facebook, Instagram, and our project website. We also added video interviews with participants and experts who took part in workshops, links to studies, podcasts, and numerous explanatory videos. A 4-part explanatory video on the Syrian constitution-making process was produced together with the design agency Goldner Weston.
Nothing has improved for the people in this country. We were promised that this would be a Syrian process, a process that would give us, the Syrian people, justice.
Die Öffentlichkeit von Position und Diskussion zum Verfassungsprozess waren
Making positions and discussions about the constitution-making process public has been, and continues to be, very important to us. While it was almost impossible to achieve any publicity between 2016 and 2019, the year 2020 marked a turning point. I think the representatives of the SNC and the Syrian Constitutional Committee have come to understand that they need public approval to give them legitimacy, and that the public is first and foremost a source of strength, rather than a threat.
In addition to digital products, we organized roundtable discussions with members of the Syrian Constitutional Committee, the SNC, and other experts in Essen and Berlin, in Vienna, Stockholm, and Iraqi Kurdistan. By collaborating with Ruda, the Iraqi Kurdish news channel, we've been able to significantly expand our reach. Since September 2022, in the last third of the project period, we've had the opportunity to test a new tool: field trips. We visited places such as North Macedonia together with some members of the Constitutional Committee and other stakeholders of the Syrian opposition and civil society. Here we saw firsthand how a country is managing the challenges of its multi-ethnic society, which includes Macedonians, Albanians, Turks, and Roma. While workshops and presentations always remain largely theoretical, field trips allow us to get a first-hand impression of the situation and talk to the people involved.
Auf Studienreisen gibt es oft diese Schlüsselmomente, in denen man merkt, die Teilnehmerinnen haben etwas verstanden oder denken plötzlich in eine ganz andere Richtung. In Nordmazedonien zum Beispiel gab es diesen Moment.
On field trips, you often experience a key moment when you realize that the participants have learned something new or taken on a whole new approach to something. In North Macedonia, there was this moment when we saw that not only the Macedonian flag had been raised in front of the Gostivar town hall, but also the Albanian, Turkish, and Romani flags. This made our participants realize that publicly acknowledging minority symbols does cause a collapse of the state. Our second field trip took us to South Tyrol. Here, the key moment was when the mayor of Urtejai, a small Ladin town in the mountains, greeted us in Ladin, a language spoken by only 2% of South Tyrol's population. He explained that this was a tradition aimed at giving the Ladin language more public visibility. Our Assyrian participants, in turn, greeted him in Assyrian, while our Kurdish participants greeted him in Kurdish. It was a very emotional moment, which brought home to the Arabic speakers in our group what it means not to be able to speak your first language freely.
Es war ein sehr emotionaler Moment, in dem auch die Arabischsprecherinnen plötzlich verstehen konnten, was es heißt, seine Erstsprache nicht frei sprechen zu können oder zu dürfen.
On 31 August 2023, the second of our two constitutional projects will come to an end. We will then have been working with the Syrian opposition and civil society for 7.5 years, since February 2016. This is a long time, and perhaps a good point at which to ask ourselves whether our work can be described as successful. This question is all the more important in light of the situation in Syria, which leaves little room for hope. To conclude this documentary, we would like to give a voice to the Syrians with whom we've been working for years, or only since recently, to create a constitution for all Syrian people.
So, I work on decentralization, federalism, administrative divisions, and local and national identities. This is my job and my passion. So, my work with the center, without any exaggeration or compliments, benefited me immensely. Whenever I join the study trips, I meet with experts and colleagues, also Syrians, with whom I can discuss issues related to decentralization, governance issues, local governance, local administration, autonomy, local identities, national linguistic identities, minority rights, all topics that constitute the core of my work. It helped me with my research and training topics. It showed me other experiences and possible solutions for the future of Syria. As for me, frankly, without any exaggeration, I am very grateful to the European Center for Kurdish Studies. This is not a compliment. I mean, I do not know how to give one. I am thankful to the center because it has enriched my knowledge and experience.
The study trips and workshops of the European Center for Kurdish Studies were beneficial because they were not only focused on successful experiences. We saw successful and unsuccessful experiences. Learning means that we must take positive and negative aspects into consideration. As a member of a constitutional committee, I am very much interested in constitutional provisions from all countries, especially countries that focus on minority rights, diversity, and women's rights. As a member of the Syrian Constitutional Committee, it was incredibly beneficial to me to take in many experiences and learn how countries reached consensus by drafting constitutional provisions that guaranteed the freedoms and rights of citizens. Frankly, I was delighted to participate in many of the European Center for Kurdish Studies workshops. These were very fruitful meetings and study trips, also very practical. I mean, you not only participate in theoretical discussions, but you also see it on the ground. That makes a significant difference, especially when you see the experiences from several people's point of view, not just a one-sided view. You see the issue from all angles. This is something that only the European Center for Kurdish Studies made accessible to me. This is very useful when I transfer my experience to others, whether the people I communicate with on the ground or even those I work with. These are enriching living examples and experiences that exist. We can use them as guidelines while working on our own Syrian model. I am very grateful to the European Center for Kurdish Studies for this experience. Since 2017, I have participated in most of the workshops organized by the European Centre for Kurdish Studies, especially those related to constitutional drafting with international constitutional law experts. I have also participated in seminars conducted or organized by the European Centre for Kurdish Studies to learn about the decentralization experiences in many European countries under which the issue of national diversity was partially resolved. As a member of the Assyrian Democratic Organization and an official in this organization, and as a representative of one of the Syrian minorities, the Assyrian Syriacs, I benefited immensely from these workshops and expanded my horizon. I sought to transfer the experiences I gained to the Assyrian Democratic Organization and the institutions of the Assyrian Syriac people, in order to learn from these experiences and develop realistic proposals and demands that are consistent with international law. Today we visited the South Tyrol region, where there is a unique experience of autonomy. I believe that going through experiences with Syrians from different backgrounds, I mean the Arab majority, the Kurdish minority, as well as the various religions and cultures in Syria, will benefit us in the future while shaping the new Syria, which will be based on democracy, modernity, and decentralization. That is our aspiration after having suffered for a long time under the centralized and authoritarian regime. Thank you to the Center for all the workshops and for this project, which started in 2016. My participation began in 2018. We were initially talking about constitutional principles related to human rights and freedoms in accordance with international law. We handled critical constitutional topics regarding decentralization, the political system in Syria, issues related to human rights, transitional justice, and diversity management. This project has been essential because it brings Syrian people from different regions together. It enabled us to exchange opinions, visions, and proposals related to Syria's constitution and future. We listened to each other. We have also been able to draft valuable concepts and strategies that can be put forward in the future and promoted through the Syrian Women's Network, in which I am a member, to expand people's horizons with these concepts that we were able to formulate and discuss during the workshops of the European Centre for Kurdish Studies. Thank you. We all wish you more success and progress. Also, the transition from theoretical discussions to practical study trips was a significant shift and a very enriching experience for us and Syria in the future, God willing.
يعني في عندي ملاحظتين بدي أكيد لازم أقولهم يعني كتير ظهرت مشاريع وكتير.
I have two things to say. There were many projects and groups that worked on various issues, but in all honesty, this project was one that lasted, persevered, and managed to show results. The other thing that I would like to add is that this center had the courage to raise all topics that were taboo and difficult for us Syrians, with all our components, to talk about frankly, or even talk about in general. So I was there from the beginning. I don't know if I recall the real number, but I think I participated in perhaps more than 80% of the workshops. It was an experience that has benefited me more than my other political commitments, because here, as I said, things were more transparent and more forthright. The team tried to invite more Syrians to the workshops to deal with these Syrian issues. I think we handled so many topics during these workshops. I mean, we spoke frankly about federalism, diversity, decentralization, and even the rejection of the Constitutional Committee and its work and contents in which we had worked for a long time. For me, it was an extraordinary experience during the 12 years of the revolution. God bless you all. I hope you continue this endeavor and work on more issues that need to be tackled and developed, because we Syrians, with all our components, still need to talk. This is the main idea. This project was perhaps the only one that enabled everyone to get together and actively participate.